Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the top stories this hour. In a bid to ease staff shortages across its economy, England revises self-isolation guidelines for people testing positive for COVID-19 to 5 full days. With 223 more cases reported on Monday, China's virus infections hit their highest level since March 2020, just 3 weeks before the Beijing Winter Olympics. Thousands of protesters pack Amsterdam's streets to protest against government-imposed COVID-19 measures and its vaccination campaign as virus infections hit a new record. India reports more than 258,000 new COVID cases, slightly down on yesterday. A major winter storm hits the southeastern United States with heavy snow and ice, knocking out power for an estimated 253,000 people. And with his main rival Novak Djokovic out of the way, Rafael Nadal begins his title campaign with a straight sets win over Marcus Giron at the Australian Open, and defending champion Naomi Osaka breezes through her opener in the women's singles.
So some rough times from the defending champion, but plenty of good stuff there for her and her friends.
England has reduced the minimum self-isolation period for COVID-infected patients to 5 days. It comes after a review of the medical evidence and is partly designed to ease staff shortages across the economy. People who test positive will need to produce a negative lateral flow test after 5 and 6 days of isolation to be released from quarantine. Just last month, England reduced the isolation period from 10 days to 7 days. The UK's Health Security Agency says 2/3 of positive cases are no longer infectious by day 5. The United Kingdom's also introduced booster jabs for 16 and 17-year-olds. Initially, invitations will be sent out to about 40,000 teenagers who've had their second doses at least 3 months ago. Meanwhile, Scotland has lifted restrictions for outdoor events, which means large outdoor public gatherings can take place again with crowds, including football matches. And we can join our correspondent Giles Gibson now, who's with us live from London. Giles, talk to us about that reducing of the isolation period. Why was the government so keen to bring that down?
Well, the UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said that cutting the isolation period down to at least 5 days is going to reduce pressure on essential public services over the course of the winter. Of course, Ollie, we've seen the National Health Service as well as public transport services such as train companies having to cancel hundreds of services simply because they can't get enough staff to man those trains, and other parts of the economy as well, really just struggling with getting enough staff with so many people getting infected with COVID-19 during this Omicron surge and then having to self-isolate at home. Worth reiterating here that this rule change is just for England. The previous rules remain in place in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales. The local authorities there have been much more cautious about the way that they have handled this Omicron surge since December. And Ollie, the central tension here is this question about, yes, reducing the isolation period could certainly ease staff shortages for things like the NHS and train operators in the short term. The question is, of course, in the medium and the longer term, whether getting more people back out into the community earlier on after they have tested positive for COVID-19, whether that is potentially going to drive up case numbers here in the UK once again. The UK government seem confident that that scenario is not going to play out.
Well, on a related point, Giles, the so-called Plan B measures which are in place at the moment, like working from home guidance and masks in shops, are those likely to be eased soon?
Well, the key date here is the 26th of January. That is the first date at which UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson could decide to lift some of these Plan B restrictions, as they're known, as things like the working at home guidance. There are some reports in the UK media that the Prime Minister could lift some of those, but also decide to keep some of the masking rules in place or tinker with the masking rules in public. Of course, the UK government are going to be watching a couple of data points really clearly as they try to make this decision. Firstly, of course, just the number of cases. We saw approximately 71,000 new cases of COVID-19 identified on Sunday. That compares to 140,000, roughly double the Sunday beforehand. And there are certainly already signs that the UK has reached the peak of this Omicron surge. But the key piece of data that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the UK government keep talking about when they talk about bringing in restrictions or taking away restrictions is the number of hospitalisations here in the UK. And just in the last few days or so, they've been flat really for the last week or so, but just in the last few days or so, there have been signs that the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 is starting to fall as well. And that is certainly going to be a key piece of data as UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson considers whether to pull back some of these restrictions again.
OK, Giles, thanks. Staying with COVID and staying in Europe, there is concern in some countries about a prolonged so-called Twindemic. That is the prospect of a severe flu season happening alongside an increase in COVID cases. Some European nations are witnessing the return of influenza at a faster than expected rate this winter. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control has reported that flu viruses have been circulating in Europe at a higher than expected rate since mid-December 2021. Some scientists fear the return of the virus could be the start of an unusually long flu season that could stretch into summer. In France, 3 regions, including Paris, are facing a flu epidemic and others are in a pre-epidemic phase. France has so far recorded 72 serious cases of flu with 6 deaths. And further complicating matters, the dominant influenza strain circulating this year in Europe appears to be severe. Flu vaccines are adapted every year to make them as effective as possible against ever-changing flu viruses, and their composition is decided 6 months before the flu season kicks in. Europe-wide data on flu vaccine uptake is not yet available, but national figures for France show coverage is not as broad as authorities had hoped for. In the Netherlands, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of the Dutch capital to denounce the government's virus protocols.
I think, in fact, we are one of the only countries, or maybe the only country, which is still in lockdown. The countries around us are actually moving backwards, back to normal life slowly. We have the Omicron variant, which is not as dangerous as Delta. The hospitals are not as crowded as before, but we still have our lockdown extended, and this is something I cannot understand.
Authorities deployed hundreds of riot police. Police were also granted stop-and-search powers at several locations across Amsterdam. The Netherlands has been witnessing a massive spike in COVID cases, mainly fuelled by the fast-spreading Omicron variant. On Sunday, a record of over 36,000 cases was reported in the last 24 hours. The country's recorded over 21,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. It had one of Europe's toughest lockdowns for a month through the end-of-year holidays. Prime Minister Mark Rutte has announced the reopening of stores, salons and gyms, but bars, restaurants and cultural venues have been instructed to remain closed until January the 25th. Next to Israel, where the Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz has ordered the country's top health officials to move forward with shortening quarantine time for infected citizens. The health ministers advised the reduction of the isolation period from a week to 5 days. Senior ministry officials held a meeting to discuss the matter, and they're due to reconvene today for further talks, and according to media reports, a decision is expected in the coming days. The Health Ministry's push to cut the isolation period comes due to a surge in infections in the country. An increasing number of Israelis are being required to self-isolate. Due to the fast-spreading Omicron variant in recent weeks, several other countries have already reduced the number of quarantine days, including the United States, and as we were discussing earlier, Britain as well. Under the new quarantine protocols that took effect last week, the isolation period for asymptomatic COVID patients was cut from 10 days to 7. However, patients with proper symptoms were asked to continue with their 10-day isolation. And moving on to India, it's reported a marginal drop in its COVID curve after days of significant rises in the daily case load. 258,000 COVID cases were reported in the last 24 hours, which is some 13,000 fewer cases than Sunday's figures, but the trend has been upwards in the last 7 days. India's daily positivity rate now stands at 19.65%. The country's caseload also includes over 8,000 cases of the Omicron variant. India's health authorities have reported an additional 385 COVID fatalities in the last 24 hours. Despite a massive surge in cases over the last few weeks, though, hospitalizations have so far remained low across the country. Both New Delhi and Mumbai have reported that 80% of their COVID-19 hospital beds have remained unoccupied in this ongoing third wave. India's administered over 1.5 billion vaccine doses. 92% of the adult population has received at least one dose. Over 68% of them have been fully vaccinated. India's also stepped up its vaccination drive for children. The South Indian state of Tamil Nadu's reached a milestone of inoculating 100% of its school students between the ages of 15 and 18 with a first dose. Prince Harry has filed a claim for a judicial review against the British government's decision not to let him personally pay for police protection while in the country. According to the Duke of Sussex's legal team, Harry wants to bring his children, Archie and Lilibet, to visit his home country from the US, but believes it's too risky without police protection.
Britain's Prince Harry is challenging a government decision that he should not receive police protection when on British soil, even if he covers the cost himself, his legal representative said. Harry and his wife Meghan quit royal duties in 2020 to forge new careers in Los Angeles. The couple has since relied upon a private security team, but his legal representative said that these arrangements did not give the prince the level of protection he needed while visiting Britain, citing an incident in July 2021 where they said his security had been compromised whilst leaving a charity event. With the lack of police protection comes too great a personal risk, the statement said. Prince Harry hopes that his petition, after close to 2 years of pleas for security in the UK, will resolve this situation. Harry's mother, Princess Diana, died in a car crash in 1997 while trying to escape the paparazzi. The prince's lawyers said the government has previously dismissed 2 offers to pay for his police protection. Harry sought a judicial review in September 2021, according to the statement. His lawyers decided to make that information public due to a leak in the British press. A government spokesperson said that the UK protective security system was rigorous and proportionate, and that it was its long-standing policy not to provide detailed information on any arrangement, as this could compromise individual security.
Conflict has forced many children out of the classroom and into child labour. They work long hours to support their families in difficult conditions. We're talking about Syria and the decade-long conflict there. They're hoping to be able to put food on the table for their families and provide education for their siblings so they don't have to suffer the same fate.
In the makeshift oil refinery in Syria, Amir al-Shaban kneels in the freezing mud. He is busy packing handfuls of charcoal in a plastic bag. Then he drags the heavy bag nearly half his size. The task is to feed a furnace that emits toxic fumes. This is what the 12-year-old's daily routine looks like. No school, no books, and breathing in fumes from a furnace. When Amir finishes his shift, he washes off soot from his hands, walking back to a nearby displacement camp. This is where he lives with his parents and 5 younger siblings. His father suffers from diabetes and clogged arteries. This means that the family is mostly reliant on Amir's monthly income of $5.
I am Amir al-Shaban. We fled 8 years ago. I work here at the oil refinery to support my family. 4 of my siblings were killed by the regime. When we came here, I was the oldest sibling in my family, so I came to work at the oil refinery. I earn 20,000 Syrian pounds per week, and this is barely enough to feed my family. We have debts, so I have to work here. It's not in my hands. I'm not going to school and don't want my siblings to work. I work summers and winters in the refinery to support my parents.
Syria's decade-long conflict has forced Amir and several others out of the classroom and into scrapyards and factories. Like the 15-year-old Mohammed Makhzoom, he works 12 hours a day to support his younger siblings. Mohammed has been working since he was 9. He dropped out of school after his parents were killed in the conflict.
My mother and father died when I was small. When my mother died, I started working here at the metal scrapyard to support my siblings. I'm their mother and father. I work from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening.
This is the reality of Syria's children. An estimated 2.5 million children in Syria are out of school. Another 1.6 million are at risk of dropping out. 9 in 10 children in Syria live in poverty. There is no official data in Syria on child labor rates, but they have increased steadily during the conflict. The COVID-19 pandemic and an economic crisis is fueling further spikes. The last decade has left a traumatic toll on a generation of Syrians, a childhood devoid of laughter and innocence. They were born into unimaginable violence, raised in the shackles of conflict, leading lives that bear the physical and emotional scars of a war-torn nation. For the world, it is a decade of conflict in Syria. But for the country's children, it is a lifetime of trauma. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
And over 100 horses jumping through bonfires. It's a purification ceremony during a Spanish festival in Madrid. We'll leave you with that story. Thanks very much for watching WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett, back at the same time tomorrow.
Madrid, Spain. A dusk festival called Las Luminarias is heating up. This brazen act is an ancient long tradition that is performed in San Bartolomé de Pinares. Every January 16th, the eve of St. Anthony's Day, Spain's patron saint of animals. It was cancelled last year because of pandemic restrictions. revelers rode their horses through the narrow cobblestone streets, which according to tradition purifies the animals with the smoke and flames of the bonfires for the coming year.
For me, it's one of the most special days of the year. We have been living it since we were little. Look at the tears that come to my eyes. Last year we couldn't do it, and for us it's a day that I think for those who weren't born here and come to see it. Maybe they don't see the significance.
Animal rights groups have long been critical of the event, with Spanish political party, the Animalist Party, against the mistreatment of animals, describing the festival on its website as an example of clear animal abuse.
Since I was 7, I have been riding. I only missed it once when I was at the military service. To me, this is the most missed night of the year. I have lived it with my parents. We have just put my granddaughter of 3 days on the horse, right now on that horse.
After the ceremony, residents cook meat on the blazes before parting the night away.
For us, it is special. It is a magical night. I say it's magical for the people and for those of us who are from here, even more so. It's tradition. It's something that makes you feel great.
Despite the critique by animal rights groups, participants say the horses were not harmed due to precautions taken by riders to cut horsehair to avoid burns. The tradition dates back 500 years. Bureau Report, WION, Wild is One.
There are many other... this is right, Arab.